From 1878 to 1968, there were 71 lake captains that called Bayview, Wisconsin, on the shore of Lake Michigan, their home. While they lived here, they captained 195 different ships, from tugboats to schooners to steamships, in voyages that took them to every one of the Great Lakes. Join us now for another episode of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we explore not only these captains, but also their ships, their homes, their families, and their lifetime of sailing adventures on the Great Lakes.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we talk about the 71 different lake captains that once lived in Bayview, Wisconsin from 1878 to 1968 in the age of sail and steam. Now this episode, as all the others, is sponsored by the historic Bayview Lake Captains Society. Today, I'm standing in front of the former home of Captain Otto Grimm. Now, Otto Grimm was born in Manitowoc way back in 1875, and he doesn't appear in Milwaukee for like 40 years, until he's 39 years old. He'd really only been documented with steamships, but with 1875 he probably has a sailing ship background too, as most of them did, as things progressed from sailing ships to steam-powered ships. Most of them learned sail, and then they transitioned to steam, and that was probably the same for Otto Grimm. He had a substantial steamship captaining background. He was at one point employed by the Goodrich Transportation Company, headquartered in Chicago, but they had ships here. That's one of several shipping companies, big shipping companies, that quite a few of Bayview's lake captains were employed by. As time progressed, they weren't so much independent operators as they were employed by steamship companies. Another change that happened over time. Anyway, some interesting things about Otto Grimm. I don't want to spoil the video for you, but he was captain of the SS Georgia, which is a passenger steamship across the lakes for quite a few years, and then it was sold to Edward G. Crosby, and I'm sure a lot of you will recognize that name. Crosby was a passenger on the Titanic, and his wife and daughter survived, but he did not. But Edward G. Crosby was a substantial ship owner here in Milwaukee. And Otto Grimm was on the ship that was sold to him, and then Otto was out of a job basically when Crosby bought the SS Georgia. So, very interestingly, Otto Grimm finds a job as an officer on a dredging ship that during the course of his time as both second officer as well as captain, while he lived here on Superior Street, captain of the SS Meade that dredged harbors all over pretty much Lake Michigan. May have gone over to Huron a little bit, can't remember, but mostly up and down Lake Michigan. He dredged all the harbors to keep them open. He was the guy that made sure that all the ship captains that lived here could get in and out of those harbors. And he lived right here on Superior Street. Captain Otto Grimm. So, pretty interesting information. He's the only dredging captain, or I should say lake captain, that worked exclusively second half of his career on sailing a dredging ship. So rather unique among Bayview lake captains. That's all I have for now. Goodies are coming up. Got a photo of the dredging ship for you you'll like. So with that, I'll sign off and say hats off to our Bayview lake captains, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye bye.
Welcome to another installment of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we discuss the lives of the 71 different lake captains that once lived in Bayview, Wisconsin, during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, in the age of sail and steam. This discussion will include their ships, their homes, their families, and their lifetime of sailing adventures on the Great Lakes. Here is the map of lake captains' homes in Bayview, to show you where this episode takes place. Its location focuses primarily on the large green arrow. Today we will be discussing the life of Captain Otto C. Grimm, who lived on Superior Street in Bayview. He had an extensive sailing career on the Great Lakes, initially living in Milwaukee, where he was first officer, second in command, of the first steamship on the Great Lakes to be lighted by electricity and to have a searchlight. He then became captain of freighters for several years, before moving to Bayview to captain a ship that dredged the harbours and port entrances all over Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. He accomplished all of this with just a 10th grade education, not at all unusual, as the great majority of Bayview's lake captains had just a 7th grade education. Otto Grimm lived in Bayview for over 20 years. Captain Otto C. Grimm was born on 22nd November 1875 in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin. Both his parents appear to have died before he was 5 years old, because he is shown living with both a stepmother and a stepfather in Kewaunee, Wisconsin in 1880. It is unknown if he had any siblings. His whereabouts and activities for the next 34 years are unknown. However, given that when he finally appears in Milwaukee, he is already well advanced up the ladder in the Great Lakes sailing community, it's possible he gained his first sailing experiences by growing up in Kewaunee, which has a substantial port facility on Lake Michigan. At age 39, Otto Grimm first appeared on the Milwaukee scene in 1914, living on the west side of Walker's Point, and employed as a, quote, lake pilot, unquote, a title often used interchangeably with lake captain. 4 years later, on 12th September 1918, he identified himself as, quote, lake pilot, Goodrich Transportation Company, Chicago, Illinois, unquote, on his World War I draft registration card, still living at the same address in Walker's Point. His ship was the cross-lake passenger steamship SS Georgia, and he was its first officer, second in command behind the captain. Of interest, when the SS Georgia was built in 1880, originally named the City of Ludington, it was the first steamship on the Great Lakes to be lighted by electricity, and the first to have a searchlight. In 1919, the Georgia was sold to Milwaukee shipowner Edward G. Crosby. Either Crosby changed out the crew to put his own people in, or Otto Grimm decided to take the opportunity of the sale to leave sailing the lakes to take a job ashore as a, quote, bridge tender, unquote, for the city of Milwaukee's Department of Public Works. He remained at this new job for the next 2 years, living in Walker's Point through 1921. Of note, Edward G. Crosby was a passenger aboard the famous RMS Titanic disaster when the ship sank in the Atlantic Ocean after hitting an iceberg. His wife and daughter survived, but he did not. His body was recovered and returned to Milwaukee, where a funeral service was held aboard one of Crosby's ships that was captained by a Bayview lake captain. More details about this captain and his involvement with overseeing Crosby's shipboard funeral service will be discussed in a future episode. However, in 1892, he learned of an opportunity to go back to the lakes aboard ship. This time, though, the ship was a bit different. It was owned by the U.S. government, operated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and was used to dredge harbours in what was designated as, quote, the Lake Michigan District, unquote. This district was responsible for dredging all of the harbours and port entrances throughout both Lake Michigan and Lake Huron to keep them open to shipping. Tides and currents would, over time, move sand into these ports and create access barriers that periodically had to be dredged out to keep ship access open. Thus, in that year, 1922, Otto Grimm decided to leave the bridge tender job to go back to the lakes, being listed again as a, quote, sailor, unquote, though based on later listings was likely an officer. The name of the ship was the General George G. Meade, and he would remain aboard as officer and captain for the next 23 years, and likely its last captain, when he likely retired. The specifics of dredging operations are interesting. Captain Grimm would have his ship, the General Meade, sail to the location reported obstructed with sand, and anchor over the top of it. Then, using a large steel pipe and other dredging machinery aboard, suck all the sand up through the pipe and into the ship's cargo holds. The weight of this sand drove the ship down into the water so much that the waterline began to approach the ship's main deck level. Once the ship's holds were filled with sand, the ship would then weigh anchor and sail out into deep water and empty the newly collected sand from its holds into the water there. This process would be repeated until the port entrance was clear for shipping. These dredging operations occurred throughout the entire sailing season, in all weather conditions on the Great Lakes, from the time the ice thawed in the spring until early December, when it froze up again. The General Meade dredged many port entrances and harbours all over Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, while Otto Grimm was its captain. During Otto Grimm's time aboard, and while he lived in Bayview as both officer and captain, 1922 to 1945 total time, and of this was captain 1932 to 33 and 1940 to 45. The General George G. Meade is confirmed to have dredged and cleared the following harbours and port entrances: Sheboygan, Wisconsin, 6th September to 1st November 1929. Escanaba, Michigan, 15th to 22nd July 1934. South Haven, Grand Haven, and St. Joseph, Michigan, 1934. South Haven, Michigan, May 1937, April 1939, May 1941, Captain. Ludington, Michigan, October 1923 and April 1925. Northern mouth of the St. Clair River, connecting Lake Huron with Detroit and ultimately Lake Erie, September 1922. Racine, Wisconsin, September 1941, Captain. Manitowoc, Wisconsin, May 1940, Captain. And Green Bay, Wisconsin, September 1926. In 1924, Captain Grimm moved to 609 East Russell Avenue in Bayview and stayed there through 1925, while an officer on the General Meade. Then, in 1926, he moved with wife Amanda to what was to be his home in Bayview for the next 14 years, most likely longer, 2535 South Superior Street. During this time, he was an officer on the General George G. Meade and became its captain in 1932 to 33, and again captain in 1940 to 45, possibly until 1948. After 1940, it's not known, but likely, that Otto Grimm remained living at 2535 South Superior Street. His whereabouts after 1940 are unknown. Otto Grimm married his wife Amanda in 1896, and they were to be ultimately married for at least 44 years, and likely for 64 years. There is no record they had any children. Captain Otto C. Grimm, Bayview's only dredging captain, the captain who kept all the ports in Lake Michigan and Lake Huron open and free from sand and silt for over 2 decades, died on 31st May 1960, age 85. Amanda died the next year, 1961, aged 84. They are buried together at Arlington Park Cemetery in Greenfield. Thanks for watching. This photograph isn't about Bayview or its lake captains, but it's from the same era of Great Lakes maritime history. We thought we'd close with it for enjoyment, as it captures the spirit of the era. If you'd like to read more details about Captain Otto Grimm, as well as the sources for the information contained in today's video, you can find these and more in the book Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, for sale now, by individual volumes on both Amazon.com and HenschelHouseBooks.com. All proceeds from book sales go to support various maritime history projects related to Bayview's lake captains. One of these is a plaque and marker with the captains' names and addresses on it as part of the creation of the Bayview Lake Captains Historic District, which will be the first of its kind in America. If you would like to contribute to support these projects, to include this and other markers honouring Bayview's lake captains, with 100% of all donations and contributions in all forms going to support them, please consider contributing to us through the listings found on our website under the Contribute button. Note, we are not a 501c3, so contributions are not tax-deductible. If, for some reason, we are unable to secure these markers, then all funds donated to this site will be given as a cash donation to the museum ship SS City of Milwaukee in Manistee, Michigan. This is the only surviving intact ship that was once captained by a Bayview Lake captain, and in its case was captained by at least 2, and likely 3, totaling over 20 years between them. Finally, we also have free self-guided walking tours of Bayview's 71 lake captains' homes, using only your phone. It's simple and easy. Just go to our website shown here, find the item on the menu bar at the upper left named Free Self-Guided Walking Tours, and then scroll down to find the map with instructions. Zoom in by street. When you find a captain's house you're interested in, click on it and details appear on the right, along with a link to the YouTube episode from this channel that provides the biography of the captain that lived there. You can also read about his sailing adventures while living in that particular house by going to the website menu item, Sailing Adventures. These are also included on our website blog. It's free, fun, and available anytime you're out walking. Just bring along your phone. I'm Simon Stanhope, narrator for these episodes. Join us again soon for the next chapter of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains.